if you wanted to state that in the future there'll never be a better crypto than Bitcoin, the first one, then I think that's a very brave claim.
This is why Bitcoin maximalists exist. They say all of that stuff is garbage. If you look at who is buying Bitcoin, the brightest people are saying buy Bitcoin, and they buy Bitcoin and nothing else. Some entity is taking advantage of coordinated FUD. And I think there is coordination to suppress the price for people
Samson,
to buy it.
Can I ask you then? Can I ask you, why do you want to own an asset that's so feeble it can be pushed around by random people?
The question of where Bitcoin is headed after it hits $100,000 a coin is on everyone's minds. It's pulled back a little bit from its top a couple weeks ago. What's next, medium term and long term? What are the major themes that investors need to know? Joining us are two panelists, experts on Bitcoin, who have opposing views on where the Bitcoin price may be headed in the medium term. On one side of the debate is Clem Chambers, founder of ANewFn, and on the other hand, we have Samson Mow, CEO of Jan3. Welcome, gentlemen. Very good to see you. Happy New Year. Happy to host you both.
Thanks, David. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to be here.
Let me set the stage for the audience who may not have seen our prior interviews. You can check out Clem's and Samson's last interviews with me independently. Links down below. I had a chat with Samson not too long ago. Samson was on the show. We had talked about hyper-Bitcoinization, the adoption rate of Bitcoin, and ultimately why Bitcoin could reach $1 million.
If you look at the failure of fiat currencies, they don't gradually fail. They fail spectacularly. And this is the premise behind the 1 million Bitcoin call, that it's not going to be a gradual, slow increase to $1 million a coin, but rather a very short and violent upheaval that sends us there in a matter of months, weeks to months. And if you look at the hyper-Bitcoinization landscape, what you do see is more and more countries coming out and mining Bitcoin. So if this is not an indication that hyper-Bitcoinization is coming, I'm not really sure what is.
I then talked to Clem shortly afterward about his calls and his views, and Clem said that once we start hearing $1 million in terms of targets in the news, it's time to sell.
People aren't preempting it. And, so I've either been incredibly lucky the last few years by being almost exactly right, or I'm right. And here we are again. It's what I said it would happen, and it's happened. And I'm now not saying it's going to a million, billion, trillion. No, hang on in there, millions and billions. I'm saying, well, it's near the top now. The top could be 150, but I think that's stretching it.
So a bit of a divergence here in terms of what you think is going to happen. Samson, let me start with you. Maybe reiterate your thesis for Bitcoin and why you think that $100,000 is not the top yet.
Yeah, so I would say Bitcoin is undervalued even at 100,000. My thinking is we should have probably been at 200 by now. But given all of the current macroeconomic conditions, the failure of fiat currencies around the world, the need for central banks to intervene constantly, and just the general perception of Bitcoin changing after the ETFs launched, I believe that changed the entire game. I really don't think there is anywhere else to go but to Bitcoin. And this trend will simply continue as conditions and more uncertainty arises in the world. So you might think, okay, Bitcoin is a tech stock. It's trading well. I'm going to exit out of this position and go into something else. But, there is really nothing else to go into. Like, what do you want to hold? Real estate? Gold? Fiat money? I don't know. I don't think any of those things are worth holding. If the trend is that corporations like MicroStrategy are rapidly stacking Bitcoin, nation states are rapidly accumulating Bitcoin, nation states are making Bitcoin legal tender, adding it to treasuries, these things are a sea change. And I believe it signifies that Bitcoin is on the way to become the reserve asset of the financial system. So my view is there is no top. And the best thing you can do is buy at any given time that you have the opportunity and the capital to buy.
Clem, I'll let you respond first to the claim that Bitcoin at even $100,000 is undervalued. Here's a price chart of Bitcoin over the past 1 year. It's up about 120% off its highs a little bit, like I mentioned before. But do you agree or disagree with the notion that current levels are undervalued? And if so, why or why not?
Well, I think that's a fundamentally bad way of looking at any market. It's undervalued, particularly commodity markets. The value is what it is. It's a balance of supply and demand. And the price is right now. It might change. It might go up. It might go down. That's what we call what future will add to an asset's value. Now, there's always a call at the top of the market for the asset to go way further. And that's where I believe we are. I think, we could get to 120. It's not all over yet, but the big rise is over in this cycle. Now, I believe that if you want to say that Bitcoin's going to get to $1 million a coin, you could be right, but you're going to have to wait 12 years. You're going to have to wait for another series of halvenings to get there. Because in a very simple model, you can see that Bitcoin has a habit of doubling every time it has a halvening. And, that is something that has made me a lot of money. I mean, I'm not going to go against that idea because it has made me a lot of money. That simple, straightforward idea. And we've had our doubling. And now we're going to get probably that classic pullback, which we've seen the last cycle and the cycle before. And if you want to pull up all the moons that Bitcoin have had, there's only one since 2010. You can go a long way back. In fact, the price was so low, you're going to have to muck about with that chart to even see it. But if you go to that, and I wrote a piece for Forbes many years ago, which showed all the moons and the pullbacks and then the following moons. And you'll see that it just doesn't go straight up. It goes up like a rocket and comes down like a rock. That's the Bitcoin cycle. And it's gone up like a rocket and it's probably going to come down like a rock. And we'll have another cycle. We'll have another crypto winter. We'll have another crypto spring. Maybe. But of course, as these assets go mainstream, so they get tied in with everything else. And now that Bitcoin is tied in at the hip to Wall Street, you've got to ask yourself, for example, is Wall Street Bitcoin's friend? I don't think so. They're nobody's friend. They take your money out of your pocket and put it in theirs. And, they will predate on Bitcoin like they predated on everything else. That's what they do. So I don't think this going mainstream is particularly necessarily beneficial. And, with $1 million of Bitcoin, Bitcoin will have twice the weight market cap of gold. And, Samson says, oh, well, countries are now stacking Bitcoin. They've been stacking gold for 2,000 years. And gold is where it is because where it is. And so I don't see in the short term or medium term, Bitcoin actually surpassing gold in terms of market cap. So
Samson, I'll
that's
let you.
something to bear in mind.
Okay, Samson, I'll let you respond to that first.
Well, gold can always be produced. When there is more demand for gold, miners go and get more gold. And, in recent years, we found an asteroid that would add a couple $1 trillion to the economy based on current gold prices. And new deposits of gold are being found all the time. So it's not like gold is equivalent to Bitcoin in any way. Bitcoin is absolutely finite. There are 21 million coins and
It's
no
not
more.
finite. It's absolutely not finite. No way is it finite. You can make paper Bitcoin like you can make paper
Well,
gold.
let's let Samson finish first. Yeah, finish your
Sorry,
point, and
but I
then we'll.
mean, it's
Yeah, yeah.
important points like that.
I think you're getting to the stats part. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so yeah, Samson, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this is the first finite asset that we've ever encountered. And to look at it as if it's a tech stock is a mistake because this is like Clem is representative of a lot of people and maybe a lot of Wall Street thinkers, but they don't fully understand that there is simply a point at which there is no more Bitcoin available. And yes, there can be paper Bitcoin in derivatives or just naked selling, like in the FTX case, where they sold Bitcoin they didn't have. But all of these things come to roost. And again, nobody really figures out what a scarce asset like Bitcoin will do when the shit hits the fan, because it's never happened before. Every other asset, there's always been more supply when more supply is needed. And people are treating Bitcoin like these things we've had in the past, but it is a different beast altogether. So I think that there's another point which I want to touch on, which is the cycles. So if you flip a coin 3 times and you get heads 3 times in a row, or let's say you flip a coin four times, and you get a pattern, right? You get heads, 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 tails, and then you flip it again a few times, and you get heads, 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 tails, and you do it again, and you get the same pattern. Is that going to keep happening forever? I don't think so. The Each flip is independent of another flip. So there is no guarantee that there are cycles. And I think it's a mistake to assume that I'm going to trade this forever and there are always going to be these cycles. Because what Bitcoin is doing is replacing the financial system. It's not an asset that's trading within the boundaries of the financial system. It is going to be the financial system. And the way I like to look at it is the German mark collapse. It's not that, it went through a cycle of boom and bust and then, it slowly faded out. It just went poof and it's no longer used ever again. And this is what's going to happen to fiat currencies. They will all be replaced by Bitcoin as money.
Bringing you guys the best information on the most impactful market-moving events is what I do during the day for my job. But in my downtime, I like to kick back and listen to some lo-fi beats and jazz with my Raycon earbuds. For me, Raycon Everyday earbuds have been a great upgrade for 2025, whether I'm editing videos, taking a call, or simply just going for a walk, or even listening to my own music videos. Raycons are always with me. Raycon's latest model is packed with interesting features like active noise cancellation, a 32-hour battery life, and multi-point connectivity, pairing with two devices at once. They're also very comfortable thanks to optimized gel tips that stay on your ear no matter what. I'm also loving these cases that they come with, this protective cover case. It complements the earbuds color perfectly, and it helps express your style. Plus, it supports wireless charging. Just 10 minutes of charge gives 90 minutes of battery life. Sound, honestly incredible. They're fantastic, totally immersive. Check the link in the description down below where I scan the QR code here. Head to buyraycon.com/DavidLin to get up to 15% off. Don't wait. 2025 is already here, so why not sound better while living it? Yes, Clem, I'd like you to respond to that, please.
Well,
elaborate on why is Bitcoin not finite per your definition?
First of all, banking produces paper assets, and any form of storage of Bitcoin can produce paper Bitcoin, and paper Bitcoin is everywhere, right? And paper crypto is everywhere. So you can't say can only ever be so many, 21 million or whatever of Bitcoin, because there can be 210 million paper Bitcoins out there. I mean, they were making paper gold in the Middle Ages. That's what banks do. They take your asset and then they write you a receipt. That's how fiat currency works. And there's no reason you can't do the same thing with Bitcoin. The other thing is, you can have more than 21 million Bitcoins. You can produce other cryptos. I mean, you can make a Bitcoin clone like that. Okay. And on top of that, the miners could make more Bitcoin. They could fork Bitcoin. There's all those things that you can do. You can add another zero onto your Satoshis, which exchanges do all the time. Yeah. So to say that there's only so many physical Bitcoins, maybe, but it doesn't mean you can't multiply the physicals into fiat. That's what fiat is. That's what fiat does. That's what governments do. They make fiat. They can make fiat Bitcoin. Exchanges make fiat Bitcoin. Why can't governments make fiat Bitcoin? And then you could go back to the fact that Bitcoin is really horribly flawed. Yeah, the security issues on Bitcoin are terrible. You get a bunch of North Koreans show up and steal it all. I mean, no government's going to risk that with crypto. The fact that someone could find a bug in Bitcoin or in another crypto and just it disappears. So it's horribly flawed. It's not going to replace the financial system because governments control financial systems because they have a monopoly on violence and a monopoly on currency. Bitcoin is private sector money. If you look at the history of private sector money, you'll learn some interesting lessons about it.
Okay, Samson, can you address the security issues that Clem talked about, and also the infinite, divisibility of Bitcoin through paper?
I'm not really sure I can. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. But Clem, if you think it's so bad, why don't you just short it? Like, short it in size with everything, because it's really bad.
Do you know what? I'm not a fan of shorting. I'm not very good at shorting. I just don't own it. Yeah, I'm very good at longing. I've got go-agains on my wall because of Bitcoin, and I like them there.
Clem, let me ask you this, Clem. Do you think that there are superior digital assets to Bitcoin in the crypto space?
If you wanted to state that in the future there'll never be a better crypto than Bitcoin, the first one, then I think that's a very brave claim.
That is the claim.
Yeah, well, it seems to me to be rather speculative to imagine that the first crypto that came out is going to be the best one ever.
Well, the challenge there is that everyone can make a clone, and you did touch on that, Clem. You said, you can make a fork of Bitcoin, you can make Ethereum, you can make Ripple, all these Bitcoin-like things that emulate Bitcoin, but none of them are Bitcoin. And this is why Bitcoin maximalists exist. They say all of that stuff is garbage, and you only want Bitcoin. Now, maybe you think they're equivalent, and then you go and invest in it. Maybe you think they're good, and you want to diversify to hedge your bets. But if you look at who is buying Bitcoin, the brightest people are saying buy Bitcoin, and they buy Bitcoin and nothing else. Like Michael Saylor only buys Bitcoin. He doesn't buy other digital assets. He doesn't buy gold or real estate. It's only Bitcoin. And I don't know. I can try to unpack some of your claims, like the flaws, the whole point of Bitcoin is that it's a bearer asset. So yes, in theory, if your cybersecurity is bad, people can hack it and hack you and steal your Bitcoin. But the counterpoint to that is not to centralize it into a government institution or database, which also get hacked all the time, but to up your security and use multi-sig and technology that's available, like hardware wallets, to secure your Bitcoin properly. So the Bitcoins get stolen because you don't have the good security. Now, your other point was that there are lots of bugs in Bitcoin. That's simply not true.
No, no,
Bitcoin,
it's the security is the major flaw. That's the massive flaw. I simply can't own enough crypto to make it worth my while these days because it's too dangerous.
maybe for you. But what was the other argument? That
Well,
exchanges add a
Samson,
zero
Samson,
all the time.
let's address the valuations part. So I don't. Clem didn't say it will never reach 1 million. I think specifically he said maybe in the next 12 years, right? So, do you agree that now is time for a big pullback per Clem's claim before we eventually go higher?
I would say no. I mean, if you look at Bitcoin right now, we're kind of consolidating in the 90K range, 90 plus. And all the pullbacks to me seem manufactured. It's traders pushing the price down to buy more. And if you look at the chart this morning, you see the green candles, the stairway to heaven. Some entity is taking advantage of coordinated FUD, which is the DOJ is greenlit to sell. Like that was done on the 30th of December. Why is it hitting the market now while the jobs news is coming out? And it all happens at the same time. And I think there is coordination to suppress the price for people to
Samson,
buy it
can I
up.
ask you then? Can I ask you, why do you want to own an asset that's so feeble it can be pushed around by random people?
It can be pushed short term because there are 2 million plus coins sloshing around on exchanges. So traders can push the price down, but it's only doable for a short amount of time. If
Pretty
you
weak
look at
though, isn't it?
it's what?
It's pretty weak, that, isn't it?
I mean, go look you're in the UK, right? What's the pound doing today?
It's not being pushed around by Mickey Mouse organizations trying to buy more.
It's being pushed around by some economic factors. If David, you pull up the chart,
Yeah, global
it,
forex is a big deal, and it's pushed. If it's pushed around at all, it's pushed around by governments, not by shadowy people that traders that want to buy more.
but Clem, governments are buying it now. What makes you think governments are not pushing the price down to buy more?
They're buying gold too. It's not going to go through the roof. Well, it might do well over the next 4 or 5 years, but it's not going to double and triple and go 10x. I
Right,
mean, they're
but
buying gold big time. I mean, China's loading up like trucks of it, but it's not going to 10x. And, people who look at Bitcoin now, they're looking at 1 million. That's a 10x, not a 20%. It's 10x you're talking about. And, the Chinese government, the second most powerful country in the world, is filling itself up with gold. It's not going to 10x. It might go 20% in the next year, 30%.
yeah, but gold is old, and there is a
Gold is
theory
old for
out there
sure.
that the U.S., if it wants to play the Bitcoin game, and I don't know if you follow politics in the U.S., but Trump has said they want to create a Bitcoin reserve, a
Yeah,
strategic
makes
Bitcoin
sense.
reserve.
Makes
If they
sense.
do that, they can simply sell gold to buy Bitcoin, and in which case you kind of hit two birds with one stone. You demonetize gold, weaken your enemies, and then you strengthen your own position.
Well, you'd print
So
money, you'd print cash, you'd print dollar bills and buy Bitcoin. You don't have to sell your gold. Why would you do that? That's a strategic reserve as well. But remember that America's got an oil strategic reserve. It doesn't push oil through the roof either.
You know what? Let's talk about something that Samson brought up in my interview last time with him. You said to me that there is a problem with too much debt. I think Clem and I both, Clem maybe agrees with you on that. There's an enormous amount of debt piling up in not just the U.S. but around the world. You said that Bitcoin is possibly, or in a sense, the strategic reserve is possibly a solution to this rising debt issue that could weaken the economy. Is there a particular reason or catalyst that will set it parabolic?
well, there's a number of reasons. Like, first of all, you can look at the macroeconomic landscape and the massive accumulation of debt in the U.S. Interest payments are getting to $1 trillion a year. And I don't think most people realize, but these are astronomical numbers and these are absolutely unsustainable. So either there's going to be a debt jubilee or the US dollar has to rebase to Bitcoin. So, one Satoshi, there's 100 million Satoshis in a Bitcoin, and you could reprice the US dollar to one Satoshi equals $1.
Now, can you just explain why Bitcoin is possibly a solution to this?
Well, debt is a problem everywhere, and it's becoming more and more evident, right? Like, if you look at the gilts, they're already the rates are going up right now again. They went crazy in 2022 September, and now it seems to be repeating again. But all of this is because nobody wants to lend governments money, so they pay more. And it's the same case in the US. Debt is growing at an astronomical rate, 36 point something trillion now. It just keeps going up. 100 billion every 100 days or something like that. But it's just unsustainable. So something has to happen. And this is why there is a push to create the Department of Government Efficiency to cut costs, to kind of fix the debt problem. But I just don't see that being able to fix because the interest compounds. And it's really hard to cut costs drastically, especially when there's an entrenched system in place that depend on government spending to function and get their paychecks. So I think the way around that is to rebase to Bitcoin. And there is hints of that when Trump was saying maybe we can use Bitcoin to pay off the debt. And other politicians in the US have said the same thing too. So if that does catch on, then you do have this step transformation of Bitcoin into a reserve asset. And this is why there is no cycle. It's just replacing fiat money.
Before I get Clem to respond, how is Bitcoin going to be used to pay the debt? Like mechanically speaking, they're going to buy the Bitcoin and then use it to pay off debt once it appreciates. Is that the logic here?
Well, I think they need to accumulate some Bitcoin in the treasury. So they want 1 million coins, which is difficult to acquire. And then you would be able to say, we'll meet debt requirements with Satoshi. So $1 equals one Satoshi now, which puts Bitcoin at $100 million a coin. And then at that point, you just say, you get a Satoshi every dollar that we owe you.
Okay, Clem, do you agree that a new monetary system needs to emerge? And if so, is it going to be one that is backed by Bitcoin?
Well, it's not going to be, is it? I mean, why would government chop its own head off by tying itself to an asset that it doesn't control? I mean, it has a monopoly of violence and it has the monopoly of money. And why would it give that up? And the problem with the debt, if there is a problem with the debt, is because the people that run the country like to spend money. They're not going to suddenly say, "Oh, we're not going to spend money." All they've got to do is stop spending money, and you don't have a debt problem. But what people don't realize is there's a fairly big chunk of misinformation about the American debt. 70% of it is owed to Americans. Now, if you're Brazil or Argentina and you owe 100% of your national debt to Americans and you don't print dollars, you've got a problem. If you're Japan and you've got a massive debt, 240% of GDP, but you just owe it to Japanese, you don't have a problem at all. For 70% of the American national debt is an asset of Americans. Americans get paid interest by the American government for 70% of the American national debt. So actually, the only problem part of the national debt is 30%. So actually, the national debt that should worry people is only 30% of the total. In fact, it's less because some of the American national debt is owned and held by the Fed, and some of the national debt is also held by government. So the actual figure that counts is much smaller because, Americans just print dollar bills and give it to Americans. That doesn't cause you a problem. It's when you print your local currency and the people that lent you the money in theirs don't want it that you have a problem, which is the problem with places like Argentina. So the actual national debt is a lot smaller problem. It's still a problem. It's a much smaller problem than the top line number. And people don't talk about that. They don't say, oh, Americans own 70% of the national debt and get paid that interest, do they? Oh, okay. Well, that's not so bad then, is it? Because
It
to
is pretty
Americans,
bad.
70% of the national debt is an asset. Yeah. A debt on one side of the balance sheet, an asset on the other.
It is not an asset, though. Like, let's say they own 100% of their own
Treasury
debt.
bond's not an asset.
No, it's not.
Yeah, you reckon?
Well,
Well, give me all your treasury bonds then.
I
I'll
don't
have
have
them.
any
I'll look
treasury
after them
bonds.
for you.
But I mean,
Wait,
It's a tier one asset, mate. It's a
why,
tier
why,
one asset. You can go and cash the blooming treasury bond today for 99 point X% of its face value.
I think we have a difference in understanding of what an asset is. Samson, what do you mean by it's not an asset?
well, is I don't know if you have Chuck E. Cheese in the UK, but are Chuck E. Cheese tokens an asset?
You can't
So
buy a house with a Chuck E. Cheese token, but you can with a government treasury.
Until you can't buy a
Until,
house.
but that's not now, is it?
Well, these things happen very quickly. You go back to Germany, like you said, you like to look at history. Go look at Germany as an example. So
It's a
you
very
can,
interesting. It's a very interesting period of inflation.
so
They
you can
inflated
own
their
a,
currency away because they wanted to get out of their reparations.
well,
They were in control of that inflation. There's only one party that can create inflation, and that's governments, and they do it on purpose. They don't do it by accident.
I
Not these
think they
days,
do.
anyway.
It's a bit of both. It's a bit of purpose and a bit accident. But let's say you own 100% of your debt. How are you going to trade internationally? Why do people want your dollar that's kind of worthless at that point? People want what is valuable. And if you look at the monetary system, the current financial system, rather, it's starting to die. When the Russia and Ukraine war started, the Russian system was cut off from SWIFT. And then a lot of their assets were seized too. So would other countries like China, one of the biggest trading partners of the U.S., want the dollars, want to keep their assets, quote unquote, in T-bills? I don't think so. I think they would want hard assets. So the debt is absolutely a problem, and you can say you pay it yourself, but it just ruins the currency at that point. It just becomes worthless.
Yeah, the dollar's not going anywhere. If anything, it's going up.
The
People have
dollar,
been singing about the dollar dying for years and years, ever since I was a child, and here it still is, still strong, still the number one currency.
it is the number one fiat currency because it's the reserve asset currently. But if you go back in history and you look at every reserve currency of the world, they last for about 100 years, more or less. And if you go back and you look at the dollar, like David can pull up a chart, the purchasing power of a dollar over the last 100 years, from 1924 to 2024, it's gone to about zero. You're literally incorrect that it's held value over time.
I think, yeah, I think we're
I never said it held value.
yeah, in the sense that inflation happens, the fiat currency buys less and less of things over time. But how does this relate to Bitcoin? I mean, is Bitcoin the future of money? Is it the medium of exchange of the world, the de facto medium of exchange? Is that where we're heading towards? Is that what you're saying, Samson?
I believe so. So if you look at all the fiat money right now, it is a grand experiment that started when we severed from gold, and it just became money printed out of thin air. And if you look at the vast majority of human history, there is work behind every money. If it's gold, it's digging it up, refining it. If it's beaver pelts, then you have to catch and skin the beaver. If it's beads, you have to make the thing of beads. There's a lot of work involved. So the big experiment I see is not something like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is hard money. It's energy based on money, or energy money. And then you have metallic money, metals that are used as money for much of human history. Those are inferior to Bitcoin because energy money like Bitcoin can be teleported around the world instantly because we have the internet. And it can be verified, which you cannot do with metallic money. You can't count the atoms easily in a gold bar. You can't even tell it's real. And there's case after case of reserve metallic monies that are fake. They're bars of lead wrapped in gold, or silver wrapped in lead wrapped in silver. So this is why Bitcoin is inevitably going to replace everything because it's a system that functions without the control of a government. And Clem, you're saying, why would a government give up control? The governments don't want to give up control, but they have no choice at this point. If you look at the
No,
UK as
that's
an
not the way
example,
governments work, my friend. You just have to look at North Korea to see that governments can pretty much do what they want if they get their act together.
so are you saying the UK is like North Korea? The people have no voice, no self-determination?
Well, they have a lot less voice now than they did a few years ago, right?
Right, but if you say everyone in the UK now has Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is just simply 12 words, you can memorize it. You don't keep it on a hot wallet on your PC at home. You write it down or you stamp it into a metal seed plate or something, and you put it into a safe. If everybody had, I don't know,
No one's ever
$10,000.
broken into a safe. No one's ever stolen a safe.
Yeah,
No,
but
no
the
one's
point
ever
is,
cracked a safe.
it's very easy to steal money from people or take it from them when it's in a bank account. And
Look,
we had that.
a week doesn't go by that someone's trying to steal my crypto. Every bloody day, someone's trying to steal my crypto. None of my other assets is every day someone trying to steal them. But going back to an earlier point, the fundamental flaw in your argument comes back to Gresham's law. Okay, you're saying Bitcoin's hard money, Bitcoin's great money. I'll agree with you. Bad money drives out good. That's Gresham's law. That's the law of money. So bad money in your book, Fiat, drives out Bitcoin, right? That's the law. That's the law of monetary things.
The Gresham's law is that you spend the worthless money first. So
Bad
you'll
money drives out
spend.
good because of that. Yeah.
I think you're misinterpreting Gresham's law. It's that you spend the bad money first. You keep the good money. So if you have both pounds and Bitcoin, you spend your pounds first. You don't
It
spend your
circulates.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It is used as money. Yeah.
But you
It drives out the good money, which ends up in a pot
Let,
buried
let me let, let me let me
in
just
your
let me just ask
basement.
Samson this. Okay, so what is the road to higher adoption or higher levels of adoption for Bitcoin? Will people be using it as a store of value, as a medium of exchange? Will people be using it as an investment vehicle, as a speculative asset? I mean, what do you think the path is going forward for the majority of people who have access to financial markets?
Yeah, so I would say we're on track to become a unit of account, and that is probably when we get to 500K per coin or something like that. And that's the point at which we start to demonetize gold, demonetize real estate, things that have been used to store value in proxy because there's nothing better. And when Bitcoin reaches those levels, people will start to say, okay, I'm not going to sell you a house for pounds anymore. I don't want the pounds. It's driving out the bad money at that point. And they'll say, pay me in Bitcoin. And all of the technologies that companies like Blockstream, Jan3, and others that are building, this is enabling Bitcoin to be paying, for a cup of coffee using second layer technology. So absolutely, Bitcoin is going to replace everything. It's going to be a store of value, medium of exchange, and a unit of account.
Okay, to Clem's point about security, let me just pull up this. You're both aware of the breakthroughs in quantum computing. So people have been writing about the impact of quantum computing with the potential impact on cryptography and Bitcoin in particular, with the arrival of Google's Willow, which is astronomically faster than anything that we have currently. It is potentially possible, people write, that the blockchain of Bitcoin could be decoded by quantum computing. Clem, I'll let you respond to this first, and then Samson.
I don't think that'll happen. And
Okay.
they will. You see, Bitcoin isn't really that immutable. And if they came up with a way of rehashing and finding private keys of quantum computing, they'd just change the algo and make it X infinitely harder, and so on and so forth. So the code will just be changed. It's allowed to be changed. I mean, as long as there's consensus, they can do what they like with Bitcoin. And at some point, there would be consensus. I mean, Bitcoin would be destroyed, right? So the miners would get consensus, and there would be a new algo, and things would change. And it could be the same with a number of Bitcoins that could be issued. But with consensus, that number can be changed. And, who's to say that it wouldn't be at some time in the future? It is not immutable. With consensus, it can be changed and it has been in the past. And, that to say that it would never be more than 21 million, to say that quantum will break the algo at some point in the future, that's not actually set in stone. Very, very difficult. It need very, very good reason for the system to be changed. And it would probably be a lot of hard work and consensus to do it, but it can be done. And things that can be done generally, are done in the end.
Samson, the market is not reacting too negatively to this development. But anyway, I'll let you respond to this. What do you think of this development?
Well, I agree in some point with Clem that quantum is not a threat. I don't believe that it is at a stage where it can be a threat right now. I think maybe in 10 years, maybe if we're lucky. But there are upgrades to Bitcoin. And, Clem is right to that point. There are upgrades and there are consensus decisions that, everyone agrees to run a node. And the rules can change to a point. But it's not like there will be consensus to make Bitcoin inflationary or to increase the supply infinitely. That just won't happen because nobody in their right mind would agree to these things. And you need absolute supermajority to implement some sort of change like that, and likely would need to be a soft fork as well. So backwards compatible. So there are security upgrades that can be done. There are upgrades that can protect different elements of Bitcoin that could potentially be susceptible to quantum computing. But in large part, I think it's far away, and the existing financial system is far at greater risk. Like your bank PIN is 4 digits for the most part. A private key to Bitcoin is far, far more complex and larger.
And what's your mother's maiden name, Samson?
Sorry?
What's your mother's maiden name?
Clem.
It's my little joke.
Clem, so if you don't believe that Bitcoin has a place in the government's treasury, do you think it has a place?
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. Of course it has it's another asset. It's just another asset. It's not this magical, all-powering, earth-devouring, marvelous thing.
So yes or no? Should the U.S. adopt Bitcoin as a strategic reserve?
In the same way as it does oil and it does other metals and commodities. Yeah, sure, why not?
Okay, so there's nothing wrong with that per se.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all.
But do you think it'll have any impact on the price, short term or long term?
Not really.
Okay, I think
the oil reserve, the strategic oil reserve of America doesn't affect the oil price that much.
What is the value? I'll let Clem respond. I'll let Samson respond to this as well. What is the value in 2025? I'm not talking about 15 years or 100 years from now when the last Bitcoin is mined, but right now, what is the value for the average investor to hold Bitcoin? With the value proposition, rather.
Okay, diversified portfolio of risk is always a good thing, and it's another asset. So why wouldn't you hold some of it?
So it's like it's like a tech stock. It's just another speculative asset.
I would in normal cases just dollar cost average it. In fact, if you used to type in dollar cost average into Google, I would pop up saying do it to Bitcoin. And there's times to buy when it's cheap and sell when it's not cheap is normally good advice. But there's nothing wrong with dollar cost averaging crypto, Bitcoin. As long as you keep it within a decent balance of your other portfolio. It makes sense. It used to be uncorrelated. Now it's not uncorrelated. But nonetheless, a diversified portfolio of assets is always a good idea. And it's another asset.
Okay. Samson, you've already given your thesis for the upside, but just tell us again, the value proposition for holding it in 2025, given that it's already climbed 120% over the last 12 months.
I mean, if you're holding Bitcoin for the long term, then you should hold as much as you're comfortable with in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the only asset that can't be seized, stolen, or debased. Everything else is inferior to Bitcoin. You buy a house, then it could be burned. It could.
Let me ask you this: Would you buy a house using Bitcoin? Like I sell you a house, Samson. I say I accept 5 Bitcoin, whatever the case may be. Would you do it?
Not for another 10, 20 years. Okay. 10, 20 years later, maybe.
Okay.
I don't agree it can't be stolen. I don't agree it can't be seized. There's Bitcoin getting seized by governments all day long at the moment. And it certainly could be stolen. I mean, all I've got to do is go onto Twitter and say, I've got some Bitcoin, can you help me? And a load of crooks will come out of the woodwork and start suggesting that, they'll sort me out. And they'll steal my Bitcoin pretty quick.
That's why you don't engage with those guys.
Yeah, but it's like saying, I don't mind living in this city, but I can't walk down half of it because I'm going to get murdered. I mean, that's not an argument for living in that city.
Governments will seize Bitcoin if it related to some crime. But if you imagine everybody in the UK held Bitcoin and they held it securely, not on their their internet connected computers, then how does the government seize everybody's Bitcoin? What if someone just memorized 12 words? How do they seize it?
Well, I've
So,
got North Korea trying to seize my Bitcoin right now.
but I thought you sold it all.
I did, but they're still trying to hack me.
Okay.
Don't you have people trying to hack you every week? You must
No?
So
do.
so so
You
so
don't?
Samson,
Really? Carl, you lucky man. You lucky man.
I
Tell me
want to
how.
talk. Let's talk about altcoins for just a minute compared to Bitcoins. One argument against Bitcoin, Samson, I'd like you to address this first, is that each one of Bitcoin's value propositions can be replaced by something else in the crypto ecosystem by a superior coin for that particular purpose. If you were to look at a medium of exchange, we have stable coins that are, if you take a look at payments platforms like coin payments, most of their 80% of the transactions now with stable coins. That used to be Bitcoins. If you look at the store of value aspect, one can make the argument for Bitcoin. We could also make the argument for something else. If you take a look at fungibility, we have NFTs, for example. There's just something else for each aspect of Bitcoin. How would you respond to that?
I mean, anybody can make a fork, and we've gone through this. There were tons of Bitcoin forks. We had the block size war where people tried to fork it. But Bitcoin cannot be changed without consensus. And that is not true for most of these other things, because most of them are basically corporations pretending to be decentralized and mimicking Bitcoin as best of their ability. And a lot of things like stablecoins, they are centralized. There is an issuer of the stablecoin, and those will only last so long as the fiat currencies function. So
Right.
Bitcoin is the only thing that can really survive, and it has this critical mass of both adoption and people that run nodes and develop the software. And that's not the case for everything else. If you could coalesce and have that critical mass, then there wouldn't be Solana. Those Solana guys would be working on Ethereum. But
Yeah.
that's not the case for altcoins. Everybody is motivated to create their own new altcoin, as you're saying, to serve some niche. And more people that are new, that don't understand it, might buy that narrative. But the people that have gone through, a couple of years in the space, they kind of understand eventually that, okay, altcoins exist to mine Bitcoin from people, right? And if you look at the behavior of a lot of the crypto founders, what do when they do their ICO? They buy Bitcoin. Who are some of the biggest holders of Bitcoin? It's Tezos, EOS, the guys that did ICOs to launch their token. How's their token doing today? You can go check. How's Bitcoin doing today, and how much Bitcoin do they have? They have a good chunk.
Okay. So yeah, there's also the network effect, right? That we should comment on. That is a pro for Bitcoin. Clem, Satoshi intended Bitcoin in his original white paper, or their white paper, to be a peer-to-peer network. Now, it is used in some cases, in many cases, as a peer-to-peer system, but not universally. Meaning, if most people when they transfer money to their peers, at least in developed countries, don't currently use Bitcoin. B2B is a different story. Why do you think that is? You mentioned Gresham's law. Is there another reason?
Well, people like to have environments provided to them to make their life easy. And, people like Binance may have a great platform that makes Bitcoin and all the other cryptos dead easy and engaging and exciting. And they look after the custody and blah, 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 blah. And people give up their private key dominance over their crypto and hand it off to the third party who does a better job. And, sometimes does a better job, sometimes runs off with the crypto and disappears. So, it's kind of natural that people like to have layers of intermediates to actually take away the bind and the difficulty of dealing with crypto that most people find, a very steep learning curve. So that's a natural thing to happen. And I love crypto, but there's some serious flaws. And Bitcoin is the best because it's got the best meme, it's got the best brand. It hasn't got people fiddling with it and getting up to monkey business like a load of proof of stake coins do. The proof of work is a definite benefit for it, and that's why it is the £800 gorilla in the sphere. My only disagreement is this idea that somehow is the all the euro is going to vanish and the yen's going to vanish and the dollar's going to vanish and there's just going to be Bitcoin and it's going to be $1 billion a coin and buy it now and in 30 years time you'll be the richest person in at the crematorium. I don't agree. It's just another asset.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you the same question I asked Samson. Would you buy a house using Bitcoin? If I were to sell you a house, you
Sure,
exchange Bitcoins
sure. Bitcoin is
now, today.
denominated in dollars. Dollars are not denominated in Bitcoin. This is probably where I differ from Samson.
So then,
And,
by definition, what you're saying is there's a hard asset, in this case, real estate. I'm using real estate that theoretically has better value long term than Bitcoin. Otherwise, you wouldn't sell your Bitcoin for this house.
most billionaires in this world have made their billions out of real estate. So,
Mhm.
why would you fight it?
Closing thoughts. So, Samson, reiterate one more time your outlook for Bitcoin for 2025.
I think there are going to be big moves this year. I think 2025 we could see 1 million per coin. And I still think that you should just buy it regardless of the price. There is no need to wait for a pullback. You can DCA, and I think Clem agrees DCA is good. But if you can lump sum buy. If it's good enough for Sailor as a strategy, then it's good enough for your average Joe.
Clem, your 2025 outlook for Bitcoin.
Well, I like to buy assets when they're cheap and I like to sell them when they're expensive. And Bitcoin ain't cheap anymore. It was at 25, 20, 18, or wherever it got down to. And I was saying to people, oh, Bitcoin, oh, yeah, now you need to buy that. And now it's up here at 100,000. I'm going, maybe 20% upside. And
That's
I was
fair, but
saying that MicroStrategy was a bit expensive, took I think 19% higher than it is now. So, it's not cheap anymore. You'd be lucky if it went another 20, 25%. And it will be not unlucky if you're looking at 40, 50,000 sometime this year.
just one follow up, Clem. How do you know it's not cheap anymore? You mentioned 25,000. At one point, 25,000 was a lot of money for Bitcoin, right? And back in 2021, if it had gone to 2017 rather, if it had surpassed 20,000, that would have been probably considered expensive at the time. So just how do what metrics do you look at to determine whether or not it's cheap or expensive at any given time?
Well, I think as the supply halves, so the price should double unless
Hmm.
something systemic occurs. And, Samson would say the systemic thing is the move into the mainstream. And I would say that's probably not a good thing. Because I think when you move into the mainstream, the you attract a whole new level of caliber of predator. And in this case, it's the predators of the financial services industries who are world famous for their predatory behavior, and governments who are also world famous for their predatory behavior. So now Bitcoin really does hit the mainstream. It really does get into the big game where they're up against the big power. And I don't think it will be good for crypto at that stage because governments are in charge. And I'm not an anarchist, so I don't think that Bitcoin is the antidote to big government. I don't think that's the way that it works. I think what happens is private sector money appears because there's mismanagement by government. And then when the government catches up with its appearance, they snuff it out. And I think you'll be seeing, similar sort of occurrence with Bitcoin. Or this next cycle, there is a risk of it being seriously damaged by its entry into the mainstream and the environment that will create for it. And you've seen it as a asset go from uncorrelated to correlated now. So that should be telling you something. Now that Bitcoin is starting to be correlated with everything else, it's becoming like everything else, isn't it? And that isn't the dream, is it?
Okay, Samson, I'll let you respond to that and we can close it off here.
Yeah, well, there's elements there I agree with. We do need to be cautious that Bitcoin is at risk when it enters the mainstream. Like entities like BlackRock that have outsized power in the world and financial power, they can potentially push for changes to Bitcoin, and we need to be ready for those attacks. And I think this is why people need to study Bitcoin, run a node, study the block size wars, and realize that the power does not lie with big players and these big predators, but rather with the individual, the guy running a node at home. And this is what makes Bitcoin peer-to-peer cash, that you run your own node and you're sovereign. You have your own Bitcoin yourself, not stored with Coinbase and not wrapped up in an ETF somewhere. But I think there is a place for it in the mainstream because maybe you don't want to get hacked by North Korea, so you buy the ETF and then it's safe. But there is a cost to that. First of all, you have to pay, some basis points to BlackRock or whichever ETF fund. But in the event that there is a 6102 executive order seizing Bitcoin, your stuff is gone at that point. So study Bitcoin, learn how to custody yourself and secure it yourself. It's not really hard. You can buy a Blockstream Jade Plus or any hardware wallet, a cold card, and keep your Bitcoin yourself.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Good talk. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Clem, where can we learn more from you?
Well, I write a lot about Bitcoin in Forbes and also Seeking Alpha. And I've got to say, I called it up and now I'm calling it down. I'm not just one of these people that calls everything down all the time, or for that matter, calls it up indefinitely. So, as I say, I like to buy things when they're cheap and I like to sell them when they're not cheap. And Bitcoin in my book is not cheap anymore.
Okay. Samson, where can we follow you?
You can find me on X. My handle is Excellion, EXCELLION, and you can look up Jan3 at jan3.com.
All right, we'll put the links down below. Thank you very much again to both of you for lending us your time and educating us about your points of view. We'll speak again soon. Take care.
Thanks, David.
See you soon. Nice to
See you,
meet you,
Clem.
Samson. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.